Yes, thank you very much. Continuing on with file item 6, we have the legislative update. Jessica Pearson. And there is a handout that you should have all received, the January 2014 tracking bill. Welcome.
Good morning. Congratulations, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Well, I'm back with my monthly reports, and that can only mean one thing. The legislature is back in town. We're officially in the second year of a 2-year session, and I'm here to update you on notable happenings, upcoming events, and bills of interest to the Delta Stewardship Council. Because it's the second year of a biennial session, we start almost, but not exactly, with a clean slate of draft legislation. Many of the bills that I was tracking last year either became law or they died in committee. The bill tracking report that's in front of you now, it's quite short. It's essentially a snapshot as current as this week for which bills of interest have been introduced or which have been successfully carried over from the previous year. My estimation is that we're in the calm before the storm being a multitude of water, flood, and drought-related bills that I expect to be introduced and amended probably in the next few weeks. There will be changes in legislative leadership this year. Senator Kevin De Leon of Los Angeles is expected to replace Senate President Darrell Steinberg sometime between now and the fall. And similarly, Assemblymember Tony Atkins will replace Speaker John Perez after the completion of the budget this summer. There have also been a handful of special elections and other seat shifting in the legislature over the past 4 months, but the balance of power remains basically the same. Democrats maintain their supermajority in both houses by a narrow margin. So in order to add a little bit of context to this legislative session, I should add that 2014 is an election year, so most members are running political campaigns in addition to their day jobs. And so far, 5 statewide ballot propositions have been certified for the 2014 ballot in the state, 1 on the state's June ballot, and 4 on the state's November ballot. In addition, several dozen initiatives are in one of various stages that an initiative must go through on its way to the ballot in California, including 1 veto referendum. The fall ballot is likely to include a number of hot-button issues, possibly including gun control, abortion, nuclear power, marijuana legalization, taxes, pensions, teacher performance, donor disclosure, minimum wage, term limits, voter ID, death penalty, and a variety of health care regulations. So, of course, there's the question of a water bond. The governor has been mostly mum regarding whether he thinks a bond is necessary at this time, while leaders in the Assembly and the Senate have called for a revised water bond on this year's ballot. However, the governor did package over $500 million in his budget proposal in support of the statewide water action plan for activities that include investments in regional water management like water use efficiency, as well as ecosystem restoration, which will be bolstered by funds from California's cap-and-trade auction. So several water bond bills currently occupy the field. Aside from the 2009 $11 billion water bond, which is currently on the November 14 ballot, there are 4 additional water bond bills. June 26th is officially the last day for a legislative measure to qualify for the November 4th general election, although even I've been around long enough to know that that date can slip with enough political will. So clearly, discussions related to a water bond are at the forefront of the legislative water policy agenda. And here's what's out there. Senator Fran Pavley has a bill, a water bond bill. She's the chair of the Senate Natural Resources and Water Committee. Her bill is essentially a spot bill, so it has limited detail at this time, but it demonstrates her intention to weigh in on the topic. Senator Lois Wolk of Davis also has a water bond bill, of which Darrell Steinberg is now listed as a co-author, notably. This bill was the subject of an informational hearing last week in the Senate, and the bill will be changing as a result of that hearing. There are no changes yet that are in print from her proposal, so it's essentially the same as last year, which is roughly $6.5 billion. And her bill has more of a focus on the Delta and more of a focus on local control of dollars that would be spent in the Delta. Assemblymember Anthony Rendon, who is the chair of the Assembly Water Parks and Wildlife Committee, also has a $6.5 billion water bond bill. And he and his committee are undertaking a broad statewide outreach effort. They're going to all 10 hydrologic regions in the state to get input on that draft bill. So I expect changes on that bill to continue through the next few months. And finally, Republican Assemblymember Dan Logue from Marysville announced his own bond in December, which includes $6 billion, but it's limited to surface and groundwater storage funding only. On the federal side, which I don't often report on, House Speaker John Boehner came to Bakersfield yesterday alongside California Republican Congress members Valadao, Nunes, and McCarthy to announce support for something similar to a failed bill that Congressman Nunes authored a couple years ago, which you may remember, which purported to address California water shortages through several controversial actions, including suspending parts of the Endangered Species Act and the San Joaquin River Restoration Program, which would include suspending dedicated restoration river flows. So yesterday's congressional press event was preceded by a letter from those congressmen to Senator Feinstein last week asking for her solutions to California's short-term and long-term water problems, to which she responded just yesterday, clearly indicating that she felt suspending the Endangered Species Act is not a solution, but she offered some of her own ideas for how they might move forward. It sounds like there's a possibility of forming a bipartisan committee on these issues, so I will update you as I learn more. That wraps up my presentation, essentially. Thus far, the other bills related to Delta and water supply are limited and fledgling, but that could change quickly, so I will come back each month and update you with the latest information.
Any questions of Jessica? Phil?
Well, I just, obviously, I guess we all saw Speaker Boehner's comments, and I'm just wondering whether or not it would be appropriate for us to at least preliminarily consider a response, particularly from the science perspective, with respect to restoration of habitat.
You turn your microphone on.
Excuse me. I think it might be, we ought to at least consider the possibility. I think we ought to at least consider the possibility. Here we go. The possibility of, thinking about a potential response. Hello? Fine. I'll just make it like this. I think we should consider the possibility, preliminarily, of responding, and at least within our organization, particularly from a science perspective, of the efficacy of restoration of habitat regarding as a response to the comments of the speaker. Now, I'm not suggesting we get into a political discussion, but apparently there's going to be some kind of a bipartisan group. But from a science perspective that supports our policy, whether that is in conflict with dealing with the drought, I think is appropriate. So I would think that maybe we ought to assign some effort or task, Mr. Chairman, to the Science Board, Independent Science Board, and to Peter here, to start developing what is the relationship. Is it a conflict with the drought response? In other words, is restoration of habitat somehow contrary to any response we would make to the drought itself, and is there any relationship there to the drought response? It just seems to me that we're out there with a program for restoration, and I don't think we should leave the discussion in the hands of those that may not be attuned to the scientific aspects of our program.
Sure, and I think actually that speaks exactly to what we're going to get to later on the agenda today when we bring in our panel to look at drought through the lens of the co-equal goals. And also in Senator Feinstein's letter, she pointed to her desire to look at long-term solutions so we can avoid this vicious cycle of drought, and that's really what our Delta Plan focuses on.
Phil?
I agree with Judge Damrell on the suggestion, but also, Jessica, you've been preparing a chart that tries to compare the 4-year-old bond proposal in large categories to the various legislative alternatives. I think that would be very helpful for the council to see. I understand that traps you into following each press release and each version of each bill, which is maddening. But
I do that anyway.
but just to see what the categories of spending are is very helpful. The other thing is that leads me to the notion: it's inevitable that this year there will be a serious discussion on changing the bonds, but bonds will be a part of any water policy discussion. I think the council should consider options and alternatives, which doesn't have to be spending dollars, but may well be language of a bond that would help implement the Delta Plan, and prepare those ideas and submit them to the governor's office and the legislative leadership for their consideration, and the bill authors as well. And I'd like to see a range of options come to us for our consideration and review. There are a lot of them that in fact, could be directly drawn from the Delta Plan. And it just seems to me that would be helpful. So that's the chart for the bonds, and then the staff developing and coming to us in rapid order. I think we ought to see a first cut at it at the next meeting on bond language. Secondly, if you haven't done it, maybe the staff can send you. The exchange between the House members in the Valley and Senator Feinstein was worth noting. It was a starchy letter response from Senator Feinstein, pointing out all she'd actually done on water and also saying get real about the discussion. It's worth reading. Then the last thing is that whole discussion tees up what we adopted in December, which is Randy's 4-page paper, you'll recall, on how differently to approach water storage. Let's get back to the point where we consider participating state should consider participating financially in smaller and medium-sized storage projects, not just wait for the big miracles to happen, as we've been doing for over a decade. And that proposal has legs, and it fits into this current discussion as something that is worth promoting, and I think particularly given the recent exchange that there's likely to be a bipartisan receptivity to this approach for a host of reasons. And I would urge the staff and the communications staff to disseminate that message. After all, the council approved and supported the draft, and so it is official council policy.
Chris?
Just as an update on that, that notice has been sent out to everyone on our listserv, over 3,000 people. But I think one of the things we'd like to do in response to Senator Feinstein is make a direct contact with her office and have a one-on-one discussion of the paper and discuss its relevance to the issues that she brings up.
Okay. Judge?
But I think, just in support of what Phil just said, I think perhaps in terms of the bonds themselves and in terms of what's going on, apparently a lot, and I don't know what the timing is, Jessica, you know better than we do, but I think the notion of getting this particular message with respect to the storage that Randy developed would be awfully helpful. That discussion with whoever is going to prevail in the bond discussion, as ultimately what the legislature will approve, that we have a foot in the door there on that notion. Is that a possibility that we could get into that discussion with respect to storage?
We can do whatever you would like to do.
But I mean, politically, it makes. I mean, I don't know how this. Obviously, you outline a process, and there's 4 bills out there, and they're holding hearings, and they're giving
Sure,
thought to this.
I think it would make sense for us to engage on kind of some of the foundational shape of the bond as it relates to our duties and the Delta Reform Act and the Delta Plan. I mean, again, there's a strong possibility that this bond does not go anywhere until the governor is ready to make it happen. And so it's really up to us, but I think it makes sense for us to at least engage on some level to make sure that if a draft is developed, even if it's not moved forward this year, that it reflects some of the principles that we've worked here to develop.
So, Chris, what I'm hearing an expression of the council of is that, one, we should consider a response to the congressional promise to deal legislatively with the drought, keeping in mind that this is the first time California has faced a drought since the co-equal goals became the law of the land, which makes this a little bit different than it was in 2006, 7, and 9, the most recent time. Second of all, monitoring the bond legislative activity and I know Jessica is watching that very closely, but keeping the council informed as to the progress made on each of those bills. And then a desire to, what seems to be a common thread through every interest group and everyone that's talking about the drought, there seems to be a fairly unanimous agreement that more storage above and below ground could be helpful. Assisting on that front. Our role as the one agency that's concerned about long-term sustainable management of the Delta, it's incumbent upon us to not only facilitate panels like we're going to have this afternoon to talk about the near-term drought response, but to continually hold up the solutions that we have put forward in the Delta Plan to deal with long-term with some of the things that we're facing today. And it could be a drought or a flood. But either way, we need to be forward-looking and to continue to promote solutions in the Delta Plan.
And if I may, the good news is that many of the bills that are out there already do reflect elements of our Delta Plan or of the Delta Reform Act. So it's not being developed in a vacuum, but there's certainly a role for us to play.
Certainly one of the ways we could respond to the governor's drought declaration would be to respond to Senator Boehner's comments. Is that what you had in mind?
That's the suggestion that the judge offered and was in response to that.
Okay.
And you and Dr. Goodwin and I are meeting early next week, so it'll be an appropriate time to discuss that. Yes.
I'd suggest that informing the various federal officials of the Delta Plan, our implementation efforts, the co-equal goals, the strategies for long-term improvement of water supply and ecosystem improvement would be the approach we take rather than engaging in what is clearly also a political debate.
Yeah, I agree, and I think we need to stay focused on that aspect of it. I think we'll be far more effective. Thanks.
Jessica, one question on the Galgiani bill. It is very similar to what's already underway at the Water Commission at surveying state water agencies throughout the state regarding potential storage projects. My question has to do with one word: funding. Mm-hmm. Is that bill is it designed to offer money?
Yeah, I honestly, I consider that a placeholder bill at this time. It's a bill concept that she has introduced in the past, and she has worked with the Department of Water Resources on that language. You may recall, but probably not, but I wouldn't expect you to, that last year that bill actually was a vehicle for, at one time, a reduced reliance requirement in urban water management plans, and then it changed back to this language which she's used before. So I'll follow up with her staff to get more information, but I expect that bill to probably develop into something more detailed or entirely different.
Okay, thank you.
We're early in the year, so.
Okay, stay tuned. Any other questions of Jessica? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Chris, anything further on file item 6?
Well, just one other item that we had. We had an annual end-of-year report that we prepared, and we have that completed. I'm going to route it to yourself and Vice Chair Eisenberg for comments, and then I'd like to send it around to the other council members once you've had a chance to see it before we move forward with it. But just to let you know that that is in fact completed and ready for your review.
Very good. Any questions, comments? All right, Chris.